Let's start that over. Good evening to our fellow European residents. Good afternoon to our East Coast viewers. And good morning to our West Coast family. We are coming to you live and direct from Madrid, Spain. I am Ty Nicole Tucker, international business student at IE University, Howard University alum, and managing co-lead for Tech IE.
And I'm Leslie White, IE EMBA student, Howard University alum, and president of the USA Club. And together here today, we want to bring you here to talk about this important topic and celebrate Juneteenth, which is for tomorrow. And for those of you that don't know, on June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after slavery was ended, Union General Gordon Granger went down to Galveston, Texas, and let everybody know that all previously enslaved people in Texas were free now. So now you're going to see that major brands like Google, Nike have decided to make it a paid holiday, and they've encouraged their employees to take this time to educate themselves and reflect on the racial history of our nation. And we have produced this 2-hour special to bring awareness about the social political injustices charged against Black people in the United States. And given all the current turmoil happening back home, we feel that it's important opportunity for us to introduce, educate, and clarify any uncertainties lingering in our global community.
And as two of only a handful of Black Americans at IE, we have been bombarded with an overwhelming amount of questions, concerns, but also support over the last couple weeks. While it is much appreciated and important for our peers to seek more information and context during this time, it can be emotionally, mentally, and physically taxing when you have been designated by your friend group, professional community, or school as the go-to person for all things Black. However, with the help of a number of student-led campus organizations, we are able to represent the voice of Black Americans across the pond. Today, we have organized some of our classmates, our close friends, and even some allies to give some perspective into the life of a Black person in America. While we won't go too far back into the beginning of our history and our direct origins, we have provided some educational resources for you to review in order to enhance your knowledge on the topics that will be discussed today. So please take a look at the IE Black Summit one-pager that should be included with your registration to today's event. And if you're logged into the live stream, it should be attached below.
So what are we asking of you today? Well, first, we just want you to listen to the conversation that's taking place. There's going to be a plethora of information that's going to be shared over the next 2 hours, and we're not even going to scratch the surface. We don't have time to go back to 400 years ago, but the most important thing for you to do is listen to understand. You might not understand or experience these stories, but this isn't a movie. This is real life every day for Black Americans. And once you have listened and feel that you somewhat understand, really take time to reflect on the information that you're processing. Digest it, sit with it, then ask your questions for clarification. Don't skip any of these steps. Don't try to rush to the finish line. It's a marathon. And just make sure that you understand that there's so many different layers to unravel about these topics.
Now, during the summit, we will have the chats open for you to submit any questions that you may have. All that we ask is that you're being respectful, okay? This is a welcoming environment, and we want to keep this energy positive. We will have testimonials throughout the program, along with educational supplements for your knowledge base. And so without further ado, let's jump right into it. Welcome to the
first ever
IE Black Summit.
For 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Can you imagine that? This kid thought he was gonna die. He knew he was gonna die. He called for his mother. He called for his dead mother. I've only seen that once before in my life. My father, on his deathbed, called for his grandmother. When I watched that tape, I understood this man knew he was gonna die. People watched it. People filmed it. And for some reason that I still don't understand, all these police had their hands in their pockets. Who are you talking to? What are you signifying? That you can kneel on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and feel like you wouldn't get the wrath of God. That's what is happening right now. It's not for a single cop, it's for all of it.
Wow. You know, no matter how many times I hear the reenactment of the death of George Floyd, or, I never stop getting chills. And it's truly heartbreaking to hear, let alone to watch. And I admit that initially I couldn't even bring myself to watch the video. But unfortunately, this is where we are today. The value of Black lives is directly correlated to centuries of police brutality and a broken justice system for our people. Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, Kwame Kilpatrick, Rashawn Brooks, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice. These are only 12 people. Only a portion of the hundreds that have been harmed or worse have died at the hands of the police in the United States. As a matter of fact, since 2017, 492 civilians have been shot by the police. So the videos that you see that are going viral on social media, that's only a fraction of the incidents that are actually taking place. But it's deeper than just police brutality. There is yet another barrier that we have to defeat, and that's systemic racism. Systemic racism is a reference to the systems in place that create and maintain racial inequality in nearly every facet of life for people of color. And I mean, this sprawls from residential redlining to education, to job opportunities, to even disparities in healthcare. It's a continuous cycle for Black people in America. For instance, did you know that in the US, Black individuals are twice as likely to be unemployed than their white counterparts? And then once they're employed, Black individuals earn 25% less than white individuals. Matter of fact, one US study found that job resumes with traditionally white-sounding names receive 50% more callbacks than those with traditionally Black names. And I can speak from experience, that's part of the reason that I've switched my professional name from Taisha to Ty. But now, while we've made a number of progressions over the last few decades, Black people in America are still being targeted.
And not only just on the employment front, it's educational disparities and the healthcare system, employment opportunities. And for decades, we've been debating what should we do about the solutions for education disparities. And it's near and dear to my heart. I love school. I participated in all the different activities, whether it was from sports, music, and art. And then briefly after I graduated from college, I was a teacher in Inglewood, Chicago, which is not a well-funded district. And today it's considered the hood and one of the most dangerous places in Chicago. And I worked with children between the grades K through 8 and enjoyed the excitement of seeing them daily. Some of them enjoyed coming to school because it was the love they received from a teacher or a hot meal or being able to just be around other kids and be kids. Often in Black and brown communities, a child grows up poor or has to grow up fast due to their circumstances. And school is a sacred place for them to not worry about poverty, violence, or drugs. And I noticed immediately the difference compared to the schools that I went to on the north side of Chicago and the west suburbs. My teachers were wealthy, they were well paid. The grounds of the school was immaculate. There was different programs that we can go to. But the children that I taught in Inglewood, Chicago, barely made it to downtown Chicago. And there are economic and educational studies across ethnic groups that were conducted by the US Department of Education in Stanford, showing that Black students and brown students are suspended disproportionately higher rates than those of white students, and they do poorly on standardized tests. And they forecast that these trends and these gaps are just going to jump in the future, especially since we have COVID and some of those schools don't have the same resources to do online school like the other well-funded ones. And then also, they found in these studies that 72% of white students that complete high school and enroll to college, there's only 44% of Black students that take that path and 50% for those that are Hispanic students. And there's plenty of studies that show that there is a correlation between the school and prison pipeline. For years, the government has defunded educational programs, schools, and the community, which would keep those children occupied and less at risk to get into trouble. And now you're seeing across the US in specific cities like LA, New York, they're pushing to defund the police and reallocate those funds to minority communities and programs to uplift those areas out of that. So there's more on the unemployment. As you can see, if there's educational gap, there's going to be income inequalities. And they're showing nationally that Black women earn 61 cents for every dollar earned by a white man or a non-Hispanic man. And that's only in some of the big cities. Depending on where you're at, if you're in the South, like Louisiana, Mississippi, that's 48 cents per dollars that your white or your non-Hispanic counterparts are making. And over a 40-year career, that totals up to about $400,000 if you're just a woman. And then if you're a woman of color, that jumps up to $800,000 that you're missing out due to that wage gap. And then, as I mentioned before, you can go into the healthcare sector. We saw that this was magnified with coronavirus, and there was disparities between African-American minorities and whites. In Michigan, there's population of Black people is 14%, but 41% of the coronavirus deaths were African-Americans. Same thing from Illinois, where I'm from. We make up 14% of the population, but then again, there's 30% of us that have died from coronavirus because of pre-existing conditions and a failed healthcare system. So even outside of a pandemic, those are just some examples, but Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to experience pregnancy-related deaths. And we even have an example of Serena Williams the other year talking to Vogue about how doctors initially ignored her. She knew that she had pulmonary embolisms, which is blood clots in your lungs, and she experienced shortness of breath right after her birth. Encourage the doctors to say, hey, I need blood thinners, I need a CT scan. She knew her body, but immediately they dismissed her and she had to continuously ask for the treatment that she needed. So why is it important for us to have this conversation? One, we're tired. And as the video before noted, that systemic racism is real and we're being killed like prey on TV. So now we're gonna hear just how the youth feel about it from the video.
Man, doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
Since I can remember, the color of my skin has always been an issue. And if not an issue per se, it has always sprouted some form of a conversation, whether it was my childhood living in the suburbs and my white friend with the racist parent who really couldn't quite fathom why her daughter would want to hang out with a brown skinned girl like me. And then it never kind of really died down after that. The older I got, in fact, I still go through like backhanded comments of, you're so pretty for a Black girl or a dark skinned girl, or you're not like the other Black people, you're different. Well, folks, I hate to disappoint you, but I'm just like them. I am one of them, and I truly couldn't be prouder.
And there's so much that entails to being Black in America. For one, there's racism, then there's prejudice, and then there's colorism between the Black community. And here to help us unpack some of this, we have our very dear friend, Sydney, a fellow Black and Abroad member, who's a software developer currently living in Berlin, Germany. Sydney grew up between Chicago, Illinois, and Chesapeake, Virginia, and can shed some insight into her personal experience. Welcome, Sid.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And we also have Jermaine Middleton of Atlanta, Georgia, who is also a current master's student at IE. He's actually training to become the first American-born Black man to climb Mount Everest. So welcome, Jermaine.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I'm curious to both of you, how was your upbringing in the States, and what has been your experience with dealing with the police, whether that's being pulled over or public interaction that went too far, and how has that shaped your adulthood perspective? And specifically, you, Jermaine, how has your experience been as a Black man in America?
Yeah, so to jump into that, for me, honestly, my skin is something I think about every day. As a Black man in America, I feel like public enemy number one. Obviously, aside from my family and close friends, I feel like society as a whole doesn't value my life. To give a little bit of background, my family is from Charleston, South Carolina. Now, Charleston, South Carolina was the largest slave port in the U.S. history. And so my parents grew up in a very racially tensioned environment, but they also were intentional about sharing their experiences with my sister and I to kind of let us know what to expect and how to conduct ourselves as we grew up. Fortunately, though, my father was a cop. My dad was actually a really good cop. I can remember literally being with him when people that he had arrested before kind of, came up to us in public and just said, hey, thank you for my interaction with you, or thank you for helping me get on the right path. So I've definitely seen examples of, good cops out there. But, he also kept it real with me. He told me like what to expect and the type of things that I would face as a Black man in America, especially by police officers. And so, when you're a kid, you don't necessarily, understand it. A lot of the racial tension that you feel is built around jokes or, just ignorant comments that you get sometimes. So it's easier to brush off. But the older you get, it turns into more serious situations and you really understand it on a deeper level. So one thing that I can think about that really stands out is when I got my driver's license. It was a pretty crazy period in time for me. I remember one day, I think my record for getting pulled over was 5 times in one day. And I think my record for a week was like 15 times in a single week. Now, mind you, didn't get a single citation in that particular period of time. It was simply being pulled over because I was Black. So, that's when I really learned what it feels like to be a target, to have a target on my back, and to just, really wonder and be angry about that. It's like, why? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm a great kid. I don't do drugs. To this day, I've never done a drug, and so it's like to be targeted in that environment, like it definitely does, weigh on you a lot. And so I know for a lot of people, they may not be able to understand or to empathize and to really think about what that feels like, but just try to picture yourself and where the people that are supposed to protect you and to serve you in society, they're the ones that are also a potential threat to you. So when I see all the stories of the people that are killed by police and they look like me, that's a reality. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, it's something that I've become hardened to and a little bit jaded by, because it's something that I've been, aware of my whole life. And if I can just say real quickly, I remember, just last year, being with my wife in the car, and, we were having a little disagreement. We're actually talking about moving to Spain, actually. And it was before we knew that she was coming. So she was a little bit sad about that. And she was actually crying. And there happened to be a cop next to us at the red light. And I was like, hey, babe, smile at the cop so he knows you're okay. Like, I don't want him to think anything's wrong. And she was like, no, it's okay. I'm allowed to be upset. I was like, no. So next thing you know, like the car is surrounded by, cop cars. We had one in the front of us, one beside us, and one behind us. And I'm explaining to her, I was like, look, we're going to get pulled over any second now. I've been through this 1,000 times. I'm like, please make sure you explain what's going on. Just, tell them they're probably going to laugh at like why you're upset. But I'm like, you need to be clear about what's going on, because this situation can escalate very quickly. It's like, I'm a Black guy in the car with a white woman and she's crying. They can take that however they want to take it. And so, those situations, it's, dealing with cops is definitely a real aspect of life for me. It's a reality that I have to live with every day.
And Sid, did you have any, could you share some of your experiences growing up as a Black female in America?
Yeah, I think for me, the first time that I really recall like realizing my Blackness and like kind of what that meant was when I was like 5 or 6, and I'd become friends with this girl at school. And we've gotten on very well, like the first quarter of the year, until I met her mother one day when her mother was coming and picked her up after school. And her mom was really curt with me, like really brisk, and just kind of like snatched her daughter away. And then the next time I saw the girl, she kind of robotically informed me, almost as if she was reciting a script, that she can't sit with me at lunch anymore or on the bus with me because Black people smell badly and have diseases. And if she's too close to me, then she can get them too. Now, obviously she was clearly just repeating like what her mother told her. But that little girl, like echoing this racist rhetoric, it quickly like kind of turned into a more aggressive and scarier like set of encounters the older that I became. I mean, I think even as young as 17, like I was like beginning to be accused of theft from employers or other places where I was, followed of course by no apology when it turned out that I of course did not steal whatever it was that they're looking for. But like these type of manifestations of racism are blatant and really frustrating. But I think some of these subtler ones are the ones that are more insidious and also can be like confusing because they're wrapped in a semblance of praise and approval, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, Ty. So like, for instance, a backhanded compliment that I got from an ex who proudly asserted to his to his parents that I should be given a chance because I was different and not like the rest of them. Mm-hmm. Or when on one occasion, an interviewer felt comfortable enough to tell me that she was surprised when I walked in the room because I didn't sound Black on the phone. What I think is strange about so many of these is that many like non-people of color don't understand what's wrong with these statements. I encourage you, if you don't understand what's wrong, to look up the term microaggression on your own time. But just as like the same interviewer who just concluded a session telling me with surprise how articulate I am, doesn't think that there's anything weird about that. It just relates to and like informs like how she prejudges me, period. You know what I mean? Like it really just comes down to her being shocked that I don't look or sound or behave like in the way that she imagines Black people to. And I think these subtle prejudices like are the things that, when exacerbated, make the US, the system of government, everything, a place where, you know, a Tamir Rice or Sandra Bland or, you know, all of these things can happen.
Yeah. And how does living under this constant knowledge of people judging, because this is what it is all the time, right? And like people judging you, prejudging you, like having a fear, like they fear you when you come in as a Black man or a Black woman. It's like almost a jump, or they have to keep their eyes on you just to make sure you won't hurt or damage anything, right? How does that affect you internally?
I don't know. I think for me, it definitely affects your sense of self-worth and like your emotional and mental and like physical health, like just having to constantly be aware of yourself and how you're perceived, like trying to be careful about how you act in any situation, whether it's entering a store or trying to get a job or get a loan or just being in your own home, unfortunately enough. I think, Jermaine, I think you and I talked about this before, where sometimes you feel an additional pressure to dismantle other people's prejudices about you. Like, you know that they have them and you feel the pressure to like prove them wrong. And it's kind of like you're putting on a show, like constantly trying to chip away at like hundreds of years of racist like thought about Black people's pattern of speech or cleanliness or work ethic or intelligence or ambition. And you wind up not entirely being yourself. Yeah, like I feel like I don't have the luxury to get angry, for instance, or like show any type of emotion. I feel like at worst, I'll be relegated as the angry Black woman archetype. And at best, I'll earn a characterization as sassy, which is a whole other thing I'm not gonna get into right now, but I can imagine that for Jermaine, it's significantly worse.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's definitely something that I experience on a regular basis. You know what I mean? I was telling somebody yesterday, I've had people crossing the sidewalk here to avoid walking past me, and that was before coronavirus started. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that's something that definitely gets carried with you even outside of America. I remember one time being on the elevator or getting ready to get on the elevator when I was in Indonesia, and the door opened and the woman literally screamed at the top of her lungs. You know, and she apologized profusely, but she was just like, I just was not expecting to see someone like you. I'm like, you know, we're Black people, we're real life out here. So I mean, it's definitely something that is a constant reminder. Especially, you know, I consider myself to be a really nice person, you know, a volunteer and all types of things like that. And so just to have that negative perception just because of the color of my skin, you know, but like you're saying, you have to, I think about what I'm wearing, you know, like, is this t-shirt going to make me look too, you know, do I look nice enough today? Do I look friendly enough? Am I smiling enough? You know what I mean? You just want to have that perception of an angry Black man because again, people already consider you to be dangerous, you know, and, you know, it's almost a nonstop type thing. But again, you kind of get jaded to it. You know, as I was telling Sydney the other day, that I was at the store by my house, and the lady, you know, was standing literally, the owner of the store was standing like within a foot of me, watching me shop. And I'm like, I'm going to pay for this. I live around the corner, you know, but
Yeah,
it's just the kind of stuff we have to deal with sometimes. So.
absolutely. And so now both of you have relocated and you now live abroad. Sydney's in Berlin, Germany. Jermaine, you're here in Madrid, Spain. Why did you choose to move abroad? And why did you select the specific city that you're in?
Yeah. Jermaine, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, for me, it was a pretty straightforward decision. I've traveled a good bit, and when I went to Spain, it was actually, you know, one of the best experiences I had. And that was maybe like 5 years ago, and I was like, man, this is a place I'd really like to live and spend some more time. And so when I found out about a university and I was able to get into the school, it was a great, you know, it was kind of a no-brainer at that point. It's like, yeah, I definitely want to take that jump and dive into that experience.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, for me, it started off as I was just kind of wandering around like different places in Europe for work and then for school. And then ultimately I decided to move like permanently to Berlin after being given like a job opportunity here when I switched careers. And so I think, I don't know, it wasn't immediately a decision. It kind of was just like me realizing a change over the several years that I had been moving around in different places in continental Europe, and just realizing, okay, like this is a place where I feel like I could be. And also just kind of realizing I was significantly less stressed. But I mean, there are many factors to that, but we know the big one.
Well, that's actually was going to be my next question. How has your experience changed, you know, being Black in America versus being Black and abroad? Has there been a significant difference? I mean, I know for me, like, while there's so much protesting and things going on back home, like I don't feel like, I don't wake up like in fear, you know what I mean? But if I were to be back in Atlanta, I would definitely have some feeling of like, almost scared to go outside, not really knowing how to proceed, you know, as much. But I don't know, I'm curious to how your experience has been abroad.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I feel the same way. It's not a certain level of like fear or such heightened paranoia. It's always there. And it's not to say that everything has been like amazing. I mean, I lived in Paris for 6 months. We're not going to get into that. Like everybody has like the things that got to work out. But it's definitely been better, a better experience than any of the places that I've lived in the US. I mean, I lived in DC. I'm, you know, from Chicago and Virginia. I lived in like Chesapeake for a long time, and Atlanta as well. And I think the level of comfort, it's kind of disturbing the level of comfort that I've felt living in all of these different countries where I don't know that many people, and there's not that many people that look like me, and I don't know the language. And I still feel significantly more comfortable and safer than I do in my hometown. And that's a problem. Like that's really a problem. I think the place that felt the most like home was Paris, and it was because of the racism. That's gross.
Okay. And Jermaine, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different. You know what I mean? I feel like my interactions, especially like with police officers in Spain, have been pretty irregular. You know what I mean? There's still a certain, I feel like I noticed them watching a little bit more than maybe some other people, but it's not like I'm not concerned. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just kind of normal. Like, hey, what's this guy doing? He's different, as opposed to like a potential threat, if that makes any sense. So yeah, it's definitely, it's different. It's a lot more chill, I would say. Again, I do experience certain things just as, being a Black man in terms of like dealing with interactions with people. But there is a level of, I guess, I can relax a little bit more just because it's not the same way as it is in the States. You know what I mean? To me, the level of racial tension isn't ratcheted up to the highest degree like it is in the US right now. And I do feel a bit removed from what's taking place in Atlanta. You know what I mean? And so that's definitely, it's been a tug on the emotions a little bit, trying to balance how to feel about that, because I'm so far removed from it right now, but I know very much what's going on and I can relate to it. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for sharing your personal experiences with all of us right now. We're going to bring you guys back a little bit later also. So now that we've tapped into the Black American perspective, let's touch on those that may be considered to have closer ties to their direct roots of the African diaspora. Both from IE University, we're going to have Camille Eloy, an MBA student, from Miami. I'm getting tongue-tied. An MBA student from Miami, Florida, and Ryan Kanawa, an undergraduate student from Rwanda and the UAE. So welcome, Camille and Ryan.
Thank you for having me.
So guys, there's a lot of misinterpretation, the difference to think that Black Americans are just a one-stop shop or that we're all similar, but in compared to those that are African straight from the continent or like yourself, that's of Caribbean descent. So Camille, just tell us a little bit more about your ethnicity and then your family. What's your experience as for you back in the States?
Definitely. So I'm a proud Haitian American. So my family, my parents immigrated to the United States around the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. So their story pours into mine. So essentially, when they arrived to Miami, they faced three different elements: the fact that they were Black, the fact that they were an immigrant, and the third one, the linguistic difference. So at the end of the day, you have to realize that all those things converged into what pours into how I am and how I was raised. At the end of the day, culture is everything. Culture, family was one of the main pillars. And the third pillar was also religion in my life. So I was growing up understanding all three elements that poured into me. So I was raised with parents who were wise enough to talk to me about the differences, but not in a way to anchor my perception of someone else who is a Black American. They just helped me to realize that at the end of the day, Haitian culture is Haitian culture. And when you walk into school, you might interact with someone who does not have that culture in the same sense, but you will get to learn about theirs and their family heritage and how they, connect with being a Black American. So for me, it was just, I have to be very grateful to my parents for like teaching me these things, but not with an anchor of us versus them, more of just an understanding that there's different cadences amongst the two.
Correct. That's my experience when I got to Howard as a freshman. I was like, oh, it's everybody, and I couldn't tell the difference. Now after living in Miami, I know all the different dialects, who's who, what's the food, everything in that spectrum. But Ryan, tell us a little bit more about your background. So you're originally from Africa, the continent. Tell us a little bit more about your family background, and then just what your perception of Black American was growing up.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. For me, I'm originally from Rwanda, but my mom had to grow up in Congo because of, the rough history that Rwanda has had. And so my grandmother was a refugee on my mom's side in the DRC, and my dad's side in Burundi. And what that led to was people, like both of my parents being, raised in countries where they weren't really necessarily made feel welcome. Because, they went from there, and even those countries had issues at the time, some still now. And what you had is that my parents had to have this whole issue with the identity, because one of them was people from that place not accepting you because you're not from there. And the other one is the fact that you can't go back to where you're from because, well, that's a one-way trip, and yeah, you don't want to do that. So the issues I think were worse in Burundi, however, because over there when it came to like education, it was maybe only 10% that would be able to go past 12 years old. Like there was a national test at that time, and if you weren't, part of the top 10%, then you wouldn't keep on going on to high school over there. And the issue with that is that it made it very competitive, and my parents had this whole mindset where they taught me that education isn't an obligation, but it's more an opportunity. And so my parents were both in places where they're not from there, and they had to struggle for everything that they wanted. And I think that that's like the thing that I've learned the most, because wherever I've grown up, I've also been the black sheep. But I feel like they've always taught me to be like to adapt to it and to make the most of the opportunities that are made available to me.
Awesome. And just to that point, do you want to share a little bit about your experience? Because you're the reverse from us. So you're from where everybody looks like you, and then you've come to school abroad here at IE. So tell us a little about your experience. It's reversed from mine, because I'm usually the only Black person and Black woman just bouncing around in most of the areas that I am. So give us a little insight about how your experience is here in Europe.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good question. I feel like, we go to business school and they talk a lot about, branding, and that is what it is to be the only one of, your kind. What it ends up being is that you have to be almost a kind of like ambassador and trying to represent, Africans or, people, from the Caribbean or even African Americans. And it means that it can be a bit draining because you feel that there's a certain way that you're supposed to act, but at the same time, it's not always necessarily true to you. And I feel like for me, it's what's like the toughest part about it is that you have to be patient. There's some people you're going to meet them and you're going to be the first Black person that they've met, and sometimes they get overexcited. Oh, can I touch your hair? I'd rather not. Like it's or
that
it's
happened
just
to me.
yeah, it's just there's a lot of things that happen, and I think there's kind of like what's sad. I think the most like the worst part is that when you meet someone, you don't get the luxury of being treated as an individual. For them, you are somebody that they've heard about, that they've listened to, that they've seen on the TV. But the truth is, I'm not, so I'm just Ryan, and like that's all people want to be seen as. They just want to be, seen as an individual.
Correct. Like we went to Greece about 4 years ago in 2016, and they were shocked to see so many group of Black women together, and all of us just were Beyonce and Rihanna, like love them to death, but I look nothing like them complexion wise. And then Camille, just shed a little light on your experience just here in Europe as an IE student and being of Caribbean descent. Like, are you automatically put in a box that you're African or something else until they actually hear your accent? What is your experience like here in Europe?
Well, definitely. I think that until I open my mouth and they could tell that I'm struggling with Spanish and then I'm really a predominant English speaker, then the experience changes a bit. But definitely I came here for more of a diluted escape, I guess, from all the pressures I felt back in the States being a Black woman. So even though I do feel certain cadences when I walk around and I interact with people, but at the end of the day, it's definitely not the same pressures that I felt back at home. So this time at IE though, specifically was a great time for me to just try to have this moment of just like, professional, it's escape, a time to just be around people from different areas, all coming from abroad nations that have this moment. And so, so for me, I didn't necessarily, I've been to Spain before. That's what, like 4 or 5 years ago, I took a 2-week trip abroad here. So I was able to really kind of get a test of, how things will go when it comes to just being in the cultural environment. So I was definitely prepared for all those cadences when I arrived here.
Me too. I've been here 3 times before we moved here. So Spain's my second country at this point. But I definitely wanted to thank you guys for shedding some light on how all Black people are not alike, whether which part of the diaspora you're from, if you're from Africa, the continent, if you're from the islands, Caribbean, or just the different Blacks that are in the States. Like me being from Chicago, totally different from someone in LA, New York, or Atlanta or Florida. But thank you so much for shedding light on that. And we'll bring you guys back towards the end.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so now that we've got a good perspective on what it means to be Black in America, what it means to be from a different part of the diaspora, now we're going to talk about our allies and bring an ally on. So in New York City, the other month in Central Park, there was a white woman named Amy Cooper who called 911 and told the dispatcher that an African-American man was threatening her. And the man we're talking about is Christian Cooper, no relation on that end. He filmed the whole altercation on his cell phone. So they were in the Ramble, which is a part of the park, which is favored by those that are bird watchers, who Christian Cooper was. And he simply asked Miss Amy to leash her dog, which is on the sign and something that's required for that area. And in the video, before and while Miss Cooper is making the call to the police, she warns Mr. Cooper that she's going to get on the phone and tell them that there's an African American man threatening her life. Okay, so her needless inclusion of his race is everybody's fear. If a white woman says that a Black man poses a threat to her, there is going to be chaos. And for anyone that has a long enough memory or recently been viewing what's on social media or seeing the series When They See Us, this is where altercation can become a bigger story. And we all know what happened to the Central Park Five. We even had President Trump take out an ad saying that they needed to have the death penalty when they were falsely accused of attacking a white woman in Central Park. So what we're going to do, we have the hardships of, being Black and every day, and it's not just walking down the street. It could be going to lunch with friends. It could be shopping at Nordstrom's, or it can be your own work environment. And you need people that are your allies, and especially white allies. So what is an ally, since I've used this word so many times? It's someone that respects Black people, understands that racism can be everywhere, and that they need to advocate for the equality of everybody. And whether it's calling friends out on making those racist jokes, those backhanded compliments or comments, staying while a Black person is encountering the police, that definitely saves lives, or speaking up for a colleague that's in the boardroom, and understanding the plight of Black people in the history. So now we're going to bring Tyler. He is one of our white allies. He's part of the EMBA here at IE, and he's going to shed some light on what is a Karen, how to avoid being a Karen, him learning about his privilege, since he did grow up in Utah and Mormon, and some do's and don'ts when approaching your Black friends during this time. Tyler?
Yes, thank you guys so much for allowing me to be here. Like Leslie said, I'm currently in the EMBA. I'm living here in Madrid, Spain, originally from Salt Lake City, Utah. So I grew up in a very, very white community. Yeah, so me growing up in life kind of came a little bit later, me kind of understanding my privilege, understanding the world looks a lot different than me, came a lot later in life. And with that, it's kind of a unique story. I came out as gay when I was 18, 19, and I kind of through that process, I thought as kind of a marginalized person that I understood all marginalized issues. And so how people treated me poorly, I understood how a Black person is treated in America. That was my thought. And as a white person, my parents went through a divorce. My mom struggled financially. Okay, so obviously I have difficulties as a white person. So I grew up with this notion that, the difficulties of life, everybody has. But I then did 2 years, I moved abroad and I did the Peace Corps, and I lived in West Africa, the Gambia for 2 years. And that really opened up my eyes. And that was through colleagues and friends that I made. And then that was through Gambians that I lived with and directly interacted with every day. And it really opened up my eyes that, yes, I have difficulties. And yes, just because I'm gay does not mean I understand the issues of other marginalized communities, and especially what's going on in America right now and what happens to Black Americans and just Black people generally all over the world. And so through this process, I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of learning. I did a lot of inward thinking. And by no means do I say this, that it's, look at me, I'm doing so much better. It just happened. And I was lucky enough to kind of have a moment where I started to read and look, and I'm on this learning journey. And everybody needs to be on a journey. It's a never ending one. And so with that, that's kind of where I kind of gained that knowledge. But going to kind of your question about Karens, these are most kind of what you're famously going to see on Instagram and unfortunately, now fortunately with videos, and they're exposed. So these are going to be kind of that middle-aged woman with that nice bob haircut that wants to talk to the manager. And they're going to most likely be doing something racist or overstepping their boundaries. So Leslie, you kind of mentioned some very famous interactions. So it's kind of the hashtag or kind of the comment of like Black while barbecuing, or
Right.
running or going on a jog, or a Black child selling water on the sidewalk. These have all been white women that have called cops on Black individuals for literally just living. And it's comical in a way that their description, but honestly, these actually have a lot of repercussions, and some of them deadly. And so we need to understand this as white people, that there's something very serious, that when we call the cops, the privilege that we have, that we know will be protected and a Black person will not be, is very dangerous. And I think kind of something that really kind of hit me and kind of been like talking about over and over, or thinking about, is what's underlying through all of this is that the white individual and the systematic fear and racism that a white person holds is the fear of a Black person's existence. So again, like, it's the white individual and the system that's built out of fear of a Black person's existence. And that's why they call the cops, for protection. And if that isn't just insane to anybody, let alone the white community and white people, like, that's a wake-up call. And we really need to understand the power that we hold in America, because it's a white culture, it's a white system, it benefits white people, that we have a lot of responsibility and privilege to dismantle that system, because we are the ones who built it, and we are the ones who are holding it up currently.
Yeah, I totally agree. I experienced it in the suburbs that I grew up in. I would have parties, and then you couldn't even hear it. It's in our basement. And my mom's fielding the police coming to the house, and they're like, "Oh, we heard it was a crazy party going on." And they're like, "We don't even hear anything outside." And it was just because one of our Karens on the block decided that it was too many Black kids or brown kids running around, and the cops were needed to come break up a quiet party. So thank you for giving us like more details on how we can spot out the different Karens in the world. So
absolutely,
since encounters with calling the police can go wrong, how can we help the Karens understand and recognize their privilege and ignorance when they're when they're in these encounters, in these environments?
Yeah, so, and there's also something to acknowledge too, is that you might not be a Karen, you might not be somebody that calls the police, and also Karens can be Kens. So men, don't displace yourself from this conversation. We've had lots of white men call cops too. And also, you doesn't have to be escalated or videotaped to understand that you're still a part of this issue. But kind of that question is first, you have to understand what white privilege is. And it's a really controversial topic. It really offends a lot of white people. It puts us on defense. And it's because, one, for the first time, we're identifying that we're white. And we've never really had to do that as a society, because our society is white. But at the same time, we identify everybody else as their race. So finally, the lens is kind of being turned in on us, and we're saying, okay, we're white, and that's okay, we're white. We do have white privilege. Again, that's okay. It's just how you use it, and how you use that white privilege to dismantle the system and uplift and create platforms and stages for our fellow marginalized communities, especially the Black community. And so what white privilege looks like is being represented on movies, having the products in stores that work with your hair, work with your skin tone. Ty, you talked about a white sounding name is going to be 2 times more likely to get a job call back, even if you're less qualified. So I mean, like, I think the easiest way to kind of understand this is like, when you walk outside, or you're about to walk outside your door, do you consciously think about your race and how it's going to affect your daily interactions? And as a white person, I don't think that, but I do know that Black people do think about that every day. And that is, again, me going into a system that was built for me and that I can kind of swim downstream while Black people are swimming upstream with about 100 other barriers going along with it. So it's about understanding it and then how you're going to counter it. And with me, this was a lot about not getting defensive. This was a lot about not defending, wait, well, I'm not like that. And it's like, okay, it's not necessarily if you're like that or not, but it's how are you benefiting it, how you can walk into a room and then the things that you're benefiting from society, and then taking a step back. How much space are you taking up in a room? Is there a space on a board of directors that could go to a person of a color rather than you? Are there things that you can start kind of replacing yourself and allowing more space for others?
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. Clearly, you have done your homework. You are woke. We need to get you doing more
so
workshops.
The allies, they're coming strong.
Just to close it out, because you have spent a lot of time doing some self-reflection, understanding your own privilege, dealing with that, healing from that. What can you tell your friends, and as the Queen Bee says, to get them information for when they're going to be approaching their Black friends about this topic or asking questions? What can our allies outside of America do? Give us a couple of the big do's and don'ts in your perspective.
Yeah, so you'll hear me a little bit later and talk more about allyship, but you'll hear me over and over again as it starts with you. So look inward, look and understand your own biases. You have them, that's okay. You were taught this. The society has been going on for 400, 500 years, and it's been going on and they were just passed on to you. Now, as you're older, you have accepted some consciously, so you need to start breaking those down. And then I always joke, there's this thing called Google. It kind of came around, not many people know about it, but it has a lot of resources on there for you. So instead of going and asking your Black friends how you can be a better ally, how you can support them, Ty, Leslie, Tom, like, you guys are exhausted. You guys have expressed this through this seminar, this webinar, you've expressed it to me. Black people are generally just exhausted during these times. They have to go through this over and over. You think you're the first person asking or saying something, but actually you're probably the 100th that day. And exactly. So take the time to understand and educate yourself through the thousands of resources online. Secondly, don't use Black people to make you feel less of a racist. So by having a Black friend, by having a Black colleague that you speak to, that doesn't make you not a racist, that doesn't make you not benefit from the system, you're still actively benefiting from it. And so these are things to understand the emotions, to understand how the Black community is feeling, how the world is working. And you really just have to stop, listen, and educate, and really become humble enough to validate Black people's feelings and their stories and their experiences, because it's something that white people will never experience. Again, white people will have difficulties. We will go through things, but not because of our whiteness, not because of the color of our skin. So again, it's just this understanding of who we are, what it means, and the system that we've built and how we can maneuver and dismantle it.
Okay. Thank you, Ty. We have a couple questions in the Q&A, but we'll save that for the end just so we can get moving with everything. But we do have a couple questions for you later on. Right now, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break as we transition into our next panel, which would be about the now and legislation. We'll start with politics. And so, yeah, we'll see you in a bit.
law is named Breonna's Law in honor of Breonna Taylor, who was fatally shot when police officers raided her apartment in the middle of the night to execute a warrant for her boyfriend. This is a critical step in police reform and will go a long way to protect residents from undue police violence.
Did you know YouTube broadened its hate speech policies in June, and it is having a tremendous result. There has been a significant increase in problematic videos being removed from its platform. In total, YouTube says that over the last 18 months, changes it made to its content policies and removal practices have reduced views on videos that are later removed for violating its policies by 80%.
Okay, so now we're going to go into our next segment, which is all about legislation and policy in the US. The protests that have spread across the American cities in the past week are rooted in decades of frustration and oppression. And I believe this is the first time that people everywhere, not just minorities, are realizing that systemic racism is real and we're all facing it together. And it's not just the individual life, the violence, a name calling here. It's actually the institutions that are oppressing the people, whether it's racist police, legal and extra legal discrimination, exclusion from major avenues of wealth creation, and the vicious stereotyping like the Karens that we just spoke about. So African Americans have protested against these injustices going back far as post-Civil War days in the 1870s. Throughout the 20th century, you'll see there were significant uprisings, whether it was in 1919 in Chicago, in Harlem, New York in 1935, Detroit in 1943, and LA in 1943, 1965, and then in 1992 with Rodney King, that we saw the police beat him on video when we were younger. And what became the long, hot summer of 1967, Americans were angry, and the Civil Rights Act had been passed in 1964. It ended segregation, but it didn't bring equality. So racist injustices at the hands of police has remained, and protests have taken out into the streets within 150 cities during that summer. And that's where you're gonna hear, after the long, hot summer, that infamous quote from the Miami Police Chief, Walter E. Headley, with the phrase, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And this has been used by Frank Rizzo, Richard Daley, George Wallace, and recently in 2020 by our own President Trump, invoking the same rhetoric. So signing executive orders to unleash the National Guard and military upon neighborhoods, this is what we're seeing today in the summer of 2020. So to better help us understand the policies that are in place and what led to the protests and the rioting today, and the results from what are going to be the results from all of this protesting, we have Ian and we have Miguel joining us today.
Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk a bit about the history of legislation and really our journey into the current time.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And is Miguel on yet?
Yep, thanks so much.
Okay, perfect. Well, just to start things off, if you guys just want to give the audience a little bit about your background and what you guys have been doing in politics up till now.
Absolutely. I'm Ian Conyers. I'm joining you from Detroit, Michigan right now, where I was born and raised. Spent some time here organizing on the political front, on the legislative front, and had the honor of serving my own hometown in the state Senate. Was elected at 27 to be one of the youngest state senator in Michigan, and really focused on authoring legislation during my term that focuses around making the solutions to the problems that we face every day.
And I'm Miguel Tavera, coming from Washington, D.C. I've had experience working on political campaigns, also in the lobbying industry, as well as in the political risk and economic risk consulting space. So very excited to look at this today.
Well, thanks for both of you joining us. I have a lot of questions on a lot of topics, but let's just start briefly with the history of the judicial system and legislation. If one of you want to take that on.
Sure. I always start these conversations with centering the Black experience around in the United States, as well as the diaspora around what we really know as the original sin of bondage of human beings. And when you look at the legal code that's been created around that ever since the initial end of the Civil War on what to do with over 4 million human beings. That's been the toggle back and forth between the forces of good and the forces of evil. An incredible text that we all hear about, but we don't necessarily dig through, is W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folks. And when you dig in on that, the initial attempt of the United States government to make good was a of the Freedmen's Bureau, where one underfunded department is supposed to take care of the health, wellness, safety, and protection of one group of people, was a catastrophic failure. Absolute withdrawal after the assassination of President Lincoln with the Johnson administration that comes in directly and just gives slave owners back all their rights and privileges. Their land, promises that were made were unkept, and the beginning of the construction of a police state in which, grants, warrants, a convict leasing system in which essentially the police were used to re-enslave people who had just newly been granted their own freedom. And thinking of the entire system that we're facing today in that capacity is really important to center it on that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So basically the system has been created to be against us from the beginning.
Yeah. And if I just may add, when you break it down in that time period into healthcare, you've got to think folks were, not having anywhere to live, any way to get healthcare in any way they could, even to the point where a United States congressman said, hey, the proof of Blacks dying in massive numbers shows that they're not fit to be in this country in the first place. We oughtn't help them. We should just let them die off. When you look at the constructs that happen around our right to vote, a very important amendment when you have the 15th Amendment that actually gives Black men the right to vote at a time when white women were not able to vote. There's just a lot of toggle back and forth in between the structures of folks who were enslaved and moving that into the era that we're currently in now. You go from convict leasing to mass incarceration. When you look at gerrymandering, the very ways in which we vote, you have this system in which jails are packed, and the people who live in those jails who cannot vote in counties that do not have a large population, however, they are counted on the census to be able to supply more resources to that district. It's really every single issue that our community is facing now comes out of this original setup from our own government.
And Miguel, I just wanted to get you in there really quick, just your thoughts on policies and.
Well, absolutely. And Ian's done a really good job, I think, of expressing the fact that some of these policies, or most of these policies, affected the everyday lives of individuals. And although we're speaking specific to issues of police violence, when we're looking at, what's happened within the last few weeks and the straw that broke the camel's back, it's important, I think, to express, especially to people outside the US, that the current economic and political conditions in the country show how violence is tied to so many other legislative areas that have boiled over. And so some of these were mentioned: housing policy that's perpetuated the ghettoization of Black neighborhoods and a legacy of rent dependence and wealth inequities. Our public school system, which is funded by property taxes. And then this condemns Black neighborhoods to bad schools and more violence. And the same policies that have led to the creation of food deserts in Black communities that disproportionately give Black communities bad health outcomes. So if we think about it in the context of the public health crisis today, that has had a disproportionate economic impact on Black communities while extending the risk of infection disproportionately, all combined with the climate of the current administration that's increasingly nativist and hostile, as you mentioned, with the response to peaceful protests, well, you can understand the reason that these movements have taken hold in the last few weeks.
And so we have, like, you guys are talking about the movements, we're talking about everything that's going on. And if you're on social media and a millennial, you'll see every type of petition going around or cause that's brought up. What are some of your thoughts about, what laws should be put on the ballot, or where people could find information about the laws that are being put on the ballot in 2020?
If I could, just great question to further some of the great things that Miguel has brought to the table. When you look at redlining, the bad loans situation, when you look at, the question that could come from abroad of, why aren't folks able to just work hard and do well, in the history of us actually doing that in achieving some level of financial stability, and then only to have our communities attacked, burned down, literally through United States policies like urban renewal, destroyed, running highways with the Federal Highway Administration directly and intentionally through Black wealth centers. It helps to bring the importance of your question of, where do we find out? Where do we go? How are these laws being authored? I think so much of our attention right now is drawn to the federal government because of the absolute failure of leadership at the top, where we're looking to it. And that has come down to the state and local level, and also to the importance of cities. So across the country, especially a lot of cities that are being led by women, you're seeing mayors take on an incredible stance and have to deal with the systemic failure that's happened. And so I would say to folks to pay attention to what those state and local electeds are authoring. And quite often, once we get people in office, we're not watching to see what content they're producing. I think we look on social media, we all see the content coming out from our favorite influencers. We should hold elected officials to those very same standards. What have you authored lately? And how can we help to take these problems and make solutions and force folks to do that? And that does come in voting, but it also comes in holding them accountable after they've been elected to actually produce legislation that's not sponsored by someone else.
I'd love to piggyback off of that, because I think that that's an incredible observation. And I think that it's actually one of the things that I wanted to mention. And I think the first political demand around the last few weeks that made the rounds, to your point, on social media was around accountability from law enforcement. And I think, and I don't know if someone can, I think, do we have a mute? Just hear an echo, I don't know if, well, just to continue, I think that the debate that really encompasses, and the issue is around qualified immunity. And it tells us what kind of change is being demanded, and also it tells us how this change needs to come about. And so very, very quickly, for those who might not know, qualified immunity is a legal doctrine in which agents of the state, including police, are shielded from liability unless they've committed an act that's been previously ruled unconstitutional. And many activists make a great point of pointing out that this is a shield that incentivizes deadly behavior by police officers. And the reason this issue is indicative of how we need to combat and pursue these legislative goals is that the Supreme Court has recently reviewed or denied to review this issue. And so it's fallen on Congress to make a determination or pass a law. And anytime you depend on Congress, well, that's like moving mountains. And so the question that's now being posed from this issue is, how can we address all of the legislative needs that we've discussed to combat police violence, and that include issues like qualified immunity, but also federal housing, education, criminal justice reform, health reform, if you're unable to make that reform at the federal level? And this movement has in many ways caused a refocus on cities to become incubators for policy. And this is true at many levels. And we even saw this during the COVID crisis of states and cities controlling outbreaks when the federal government was unable or unwilling to do so. And so given the urbanization that's occurred across many states, and another great example is defunding police departments that are inherently local. Progressive policies at the city level have the greatest opportunity to affect change for a majority of people at the short term. And on a deeper level, we should ask if we can improve these systemic racial issues better locally. And if so, what can we do to return to this idea of the polis, right, of the city-state, where communities can better govern and better represent themselves and pursue judicial activism that doesn't depend on the federal government? That was a mouthful, I'm sorry.
No, it was great. Thanks for sharing. So we were hearing about these policies. We've been through the Obama era where we all thought that we've made progression. Can you guys just shed a little light on where we are today with this current administration? And like we mentioned before that they did not enact and things are more on the local side now. But how did we get here to where everything's bubbling over and people are confused? Like, do I pay attention to what's going on for the presidential election, or do I start getting hyper focused on what's happening locally, like you mentioned? Yeah.
I would just add briefly to understand what's going on, especially as we keep hearing about the census, why that's important to folks, why that's important to communities of color, and also to the global conversation for folks looking to understand how the American electoral system works and what's happened. When you look at the population of Black people in this country since even 1940 and our ability to represent ourselves and govern ourselves having constantly been, seemingly malleable. In 1940, you only have about 300 million, 130 people living in the United States of America in 1940, of which 15% are African American. That equals about 13 million people, in which if we were truly proportionally represented in 1940, we should have had 18 members of Congress. When you go back before Reconstruction, when we had, I don't want to call it this almost Obama moment where we really believed that we're going to be the country that we're stated to be, we had over 9 members of Congress before the Ku Klux Klan and all these organized units of white supremacy start coming out to suppress the vote. And you go from a period of great enjoyment of actual liberty to another Black person not being elected in Virginia until 1977. In the 60s, we had 6 Black members of Congress. And so we've continued to have to claw back from these moments of really state-sponsored government, almost enjoyed supremacy to get to where we are now today, where we have over 40 members of the United States Congress of the 435 who start to reflect what we look like. But as we mentioned, as the cities change, the makeup of rural and urban starts to change. We have to become, more than just race-centered on who we elect. It has to be policy-centered. It has to be structure that lasts beyond personalities. And I think that's where we find ourselves today, where yes, it was a great breath of fresh air to have someone who looks like you in the White House, but we need to be building structures and deconstructing those that have not worked beyond personalities and beyond, cult of personality, if you will.
And I guess the very last thing that I'll say on this is, to echo the fact that from an electoral point of view, elections matter, right? And turnout matters. And one of the things that I'd like to just bring a quick focus on, and I know Ian touched on it briefly, was the question of representation and how systemic racism disenfranchises Black voters through the criminal justice system, but also through gerrymandering, like Ian pointed out. And so because of the need for massive transformational legislative change that is so difficult at the federal level, and given all of the disenfranchisement of voters, it is then immediately important to focus on turnout, and especially in other voting blocks, especially with white liberals, especially with Hispanic people. And I think this stresses the political importance of what Ryan talked about in terms of being an ally in practice more than in theory. And in my personal experience in the Hispanic community in the US, which is the fastest growing political coalition in the US, there's a huge, and I can't stress this enough, there's a huge gap of what the community is doing and what it could be doing. And to Ian's point, not only to elect progressive and Black candidates, but to protest and advocate as well. And partly this is because of the other uncomfortable conversation that Hispanic Americans have to have of the biases and the unresolved questions of racism that we have in our own communities with Afro-Hispanic communities. And so building intersectional coalitions during elections is incredibly important in terms of thinking about what policies are proposed, how they can come to pass, and ultimately what elected officials were able to put both at the federal level, like we've discussed, but at the city level, importantly, which is an area that, you know, unfortunately, progressives have all but forgotten in many ways. So that's my 2 cents.
No, I really appreciate your thoughts and your perspectives and sharing with everyone today, because not everybody on this call is American or familiar with our policies, judicial system, and legislation. So thank you so much for bringing your insight today, and we'll bring you guys back later to have some Q&A.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. So, we mentioned at the beginning of the segment that there are a number of killings that have been imposed by police officers, which we call modern day lynching. And that's been taking place over the last few months. It seems like repeat clockwork that every time I pick up my phone to go check the news, there's yet another Black life that's been taken by the hands of the exact people that we as taxpayers pay to protect us. So a little while ago, Leslie mentioned the Amy Cooper situation and her threat of the life of a Black man by intentionally misreporting him to the police as he asked her to leash her dog, which is in a public park, which is the law. Although completely separate events, that same day on May 25th, 2020, a 46-year-old Black man was killed while handcuffed by a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His name was George Floyd. And for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, 3 police officers watched their fellow officer kneel on George Floyd's neck until his death. He cried out that he couldn't breathe. We've seen this before. But for almost 9 minutes, this officer kneeled on his neck. And I really want everyone to just take a minute and really just understand this situation and understand why Amy Cooper calling the cops threatening the life of Christian Cooper earlier that day has a significant impact. Christian Cooper could have easily ended up like George Floyd. And needless to say, the timing of these back-to-back events was the perfect storm for all these protests. It just literally exploded. And immediately following the release of the video footage, hundreds, if not thousands, took to the streets of Minneapolis to protest the death of George Floyd. Let's take a look at what that looked like.
Minneapolis Police Department. Chauvin pressed his knee into Floyd's neck for a total of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Floyd was unresponsive when the EMS team arrived, and they were unsuccessful in their attempts to revive him. Following his death on Tuesday, May 26, protesters took to the streets to demand justice. As the movement increased in numbers, the protesters made their way to the Minneapolis 3rd Police Precinct. They were met with officers releasing tear gas canisters, pepper spray, and rubber bullets. As the peaceful protests continued throughout the night into the following Wednesday, May 27, the police presence grew, as well as their weaponization against the crowd. As day turned to night, there were several reports of outside influences inciting violence and destruction in the neighborhoods. Throughout the night, vandalism, looting, and arson were widespread throughout the south side of Minneapolis. The Minneapolis Police Department was not present to quell the destruction because many members left the city to travel to Oakdale, a suburb over 30 minutes away, to protect the empty home of Officer Derek Chauvin. The following morning, Thursday, May 28th, protesters were still heavily present in the streets. Most had not taken a moment to rest and were joined by many more people throughout the day. The ruins of last night's destruction were still hot, and in some cases still burning. People were actively on the street looting and vandalizing businesses in broad daylight. The governor made the executive decision to activate the National Guard. The unrest had spread from South Minneapolis to other parts of the city, as well as St. Paul. Businesses that had not been vandalized boarded up completely, and many communities were left without access to essential goods and food. Protesters were met with heavy violence from police and the National Guard. Multiple businesses, including the Minneapolis 3rd Police Precinct, burned that night. The fires persisted for a total of 4 nights. and from Friday, May 29th until Thursday, June 4th, a nightly curfew was set in place by Governor Tim Walz. Protesters persisted in the face of these restrictions and continued to march for justice. There were many peaceful protests throughout the days at various sites around the cities. The peaceful protests were often met with attacks of rubber bullets at close range, tear gas, and pepper spray. On Monday, May 31st, during a march onto I-35W bridge, a semi-truck drove full speed into a crowd of thousands of protesters. No one was injured, but the police immediately attacked the crowd thereafter, causing chaos and many resulting injuries. The truck driver faced no criminal charges. At night, the people who were sworn to protect and serve were witnessed raiding safe houses for providing medical treatment of protesters, shooting at innocent people, and slashing car tires so that people could not escape. Adding to terror from the police and National Guard, there were reports of white supremacists and Antifa members coming into the cities as well. Homes were broken into and shot at, businesses were vandalized, people were stalked and chased through the streets, and there were countless reports of racially fueled threats online and via hateful messages left around the city. For a full 2 weeks, our cities were destroyed and terrorized. There continue to be reports of racially fueled threats and attacks still today. In the midst of this chaos, we stay activated. We stay in the streets to demand justice, and even today, over 3 weeks later, we continue to mobilize every day and call for change.
Here to share her direct insight with us, we have Megan Tate, who is a multidisciplinary artist and activist currently based in the Twin Cities. After living and working remotely abroad from 2017 through early 2020, she has recently returned home due to COVID restrictions. And in the midst of Minneapolis uprisings beginning in late May, she has started an arts-based community organization called The Outsiders. The efforts of this collective are focused on collecting and distributing essential goods for the affected Minneapolis and St. Paul residents, and providing opportunities for local artists to take part in the rebuilding and healing process of their communities. Please welcome Megan Tate.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Megan. And then also here with us, we're gonna have Chris Caldwell, a native Chicagoan who currently lives in Los Angeles, California, as a development manager for Viacom CBS. Chris has a background in finance and has been spending his recent spare time organizing and participating in peaceful protests within his community. Please welcome Chris Caldwell as well.
Thank you, Ty. Don't mind me being in outer space. I'm practicing social distancing.
Oh my gosh, okay. Out of this world. So Megan, I'm gonna start off with you because one, you have this super impactful video. We've been seeing some of this footage since all of this kind of transpired, but you're at ground zero of this historical moment in our Black cultural history. We've all seen the footage you shared and others that we've noted from news and media outlets, but what is really going on in Minneapolis? Like, how did it get so intense so quickly?
So I think something that's just as a background for what it feels like to live as a Black person in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, I think this was the perfect stage for something like this to erupt, because it's just so frustrating trying to exist here within this Midwestern passive aggressive mentality that we have. Multiple times, back-to-back years, Minneapolis has been voted the #1 city in America, or one of the top ranking cities in America to live, because it has cool restaurants and trendy things and arts and things of that nature, while simultaneously ranking as one of the top cities in America for being the worst for Black people, or being one of the top cities in America with the biggest racial disparities or education gaps. So you have this really weird reality where this whiteness exists that is this fake smile that you see every day that shakes your hand or like wants to get to know you, but at the same time, you just feel this tension from them. Mm-hmm. There's people who live in these communities that go through many disparities, are under-resourced, don't have the things that they need to thrive in this community, while you have white people that move in and buy up houses that are cheap. They gentrify the area, they build yoga studios and juicing stores where there used to be a Black-owned business. Mm-hmm. So there's just this energy that things are not okay. And so when you have something like this brutal murder happen, so many of the people in Minnesota were already on the tipping point. And this is not the first murder of this nature that's occurred at the hands of the police either. So I think the stage was just really set for us to explode. We hold it in Minnesota. We don't say how we feel. Everybody's very passive aggressive, and that act was just something we couldn't ignore anymore.
And you mentioned in the video too that and we have images of seeing like these white supremacists or these people that are coming in from other cities that don't even live in Minneapolis, and they're helping to destroy. They're doing the looting there, because there's a difference, if we want to talk about that too, between protesting, rioting, and looting, right? Mm-hmm. And while we're trying to be peaceful, you see this semi truck just driving through crowds. You see these, I know I saw images in other cities where they're leaving piles of bricks on the corners to like encourage all of this rioting and looting. Can you kind of talk to that, and kind of what is there anything being done to kind of combat that?
So it's a very hard, I can't even say duality. There's so many different things at play. While a lot of the times the protests were peaceful, it was people that just wanted to gather, they wanted to mourn together, they wanted to chant together, they wanted to call for change. We weren't doing anything, and we're still being attacked by police or by the National Guard. But I also wanted to be known that the energy in the Twin Cities was also ready for non-peaceful protests. I feel like when you get to a certain point where society refuses to listen to you, they refuse to give you a voice, then you're going to make your voice heard. You're going to take that position.
For sure.
So while a lot of the times the protests were peaceful, I do know that people were ready to get it popping if necessary. With that being said, like you said, people were showing up and like putting bricks in areas in other cities. In Minnesota, I know before, like I wasn't out on the protests on that first night that things really got crazy, but we literally all saw these videos circulating of the same masked white man with an umbrella, it wasn't raining, in all black, who was going to an AutoZone and just bashing the glass out of the windows. It wasn't, you could tell it wasn't a crime of passion. He wasn't stirred up. He was very calm. He was very calculated. And he broke these windows and then spray painted on the wall, hey, free stuff for everybody. And from that point forward, everything shifted, the energy changed, and things just descended further and further into chaos. And there's something called the broken glass theory, that when you have a giant movement like this, if people see broken glass on the street, they immediately shift their energy because they think that's the mob mentality and that's what other people are doing, so they go along with it. So while I'm not necessarily saying that it had to be destructive or that we would not have gotten destructive, who really knows? But I do know that that anger and that confusion was incited on purpose. And I don't really think that's fair that blame falls on the Black community, knowing that there were so many different accounts of ops that were not from our communities that came here to specifically tear things up. In addition to that, while we think those may have been more strategic attacks, like maybe police officers or organized crime, you had kids coming from the suburbs that just wanted to have fun. There's so many videos of just white teenagers from either like Wisconsin or like far off in like St. Cloud or something that came because they thought it was amusing to tear apart Black communities or to burn things down. Anyone that's been arrested so far for arson has been a white kid. It has not been us. So it's just a really weird polarity where we want you to feel our anger and we want you to know that we will dismantle this system by force if necessary. But at the same time, there were different people coming in and infiltrating this movement and causing more pain and distress. And in addition to that, especially after the National Guard came in, it wasn't just people starting random fires at an AutoZone or at a Target. There were very calculated attacks on people's homes. People were being chased through the street I saw one post warning people in that neighborhood that there was a white man with a sledgehammer hanging out his car, chasing a Black man down the street. There were so many different accounts that made you feel like you were back in the 60s. This is 2020. And we're under racial attack in broad daylight half the time. So it's just such an odd mixture of so many different things that happened all at once, and they still haven't completely calmed down. And I don't know, it's just a very strange climate here right now.
And I'm glad that we have you to give this perspective too, because as I'm watching news clips and media, again, it's all target against us. Like, we are the ones that are out here doing it. So it's great to even have you to be able to speak to that as well. I'm going to bring Chris on into this. And Chris, I know you've been pretty active out in LA with protesting and marching. Now, LA is notoriously known for its violent protests and uprisings, just going back to the Rodney King beating, right? What are you seeing out there on the West Coast, and what has that energy been like?
There's either this old saying or something I thought of called "There's no constitution without revolution," which is why people are really hitting the streets here. And honestly, every been of movement where we've seen protests in 50 states, which is unheard of. The protests out in LA have been honestly inspiring because you've seen so many diverse backgrounds, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be socioeconomic status, come together and hit the streets. They've been in the most wealthiest neighborhoods down to the downtown urban centers. People have really shown out and came out together to march with the message of racial equality and racial justice. People are starting to really review the system that we've all been a part of and start to see it for what it really is. It's just been truly incredible to feel the energy out there. You have people walking up, giving out waters. It's incredibly peaceful. People are giving out waters. People are giving out snacks, just supporting protesters being out there fighting for a change in message.
So it's truly like a unity of all the communities. So we got kind of two different things. So that's a positive aspect of it, right? Like we're seeing some type of progression. We're seeing that our allies are now joining forces. The cops have somewhat calmed down as far as their protecting, right?
Yeah, I'll point out one interesting story. I was actually out protesting with a friend, and we were walking past a lineup of cops. And in the front line of that lineup of cops, the cops had tear gas guns. So I immediately grabbed my friend by the shoulder, pulled her over to the side, just as a precaution, because you never know what can happen. And one of the police sergeants or chiefs in that line saw me do that, and he decidedly took the men with the tear gas guns from the front line and put them in the back, guys with the batons only to the front, as a sense of, I see you, there's nothing, we aren't trying to be aggressive, we aren't trying to antagonize, and I hope, hopefully this shows it. And I received the message and him doing that switch up, and that really made me feel, it made me feel safe, and it made me feel good that, people in that position, police officers in that position, they do realize that we are out there to be peaceful. We are out there to just to bring awareness, to get the message across. We're not out there to antagonize or cause any violence.
Yeah. And Megan, are the National Guard, are they still deployed in Minnesota?
No, I don't quite remember how many days it was, but I believe they were only here as long as the curfew was in effect. So it was about 5 to 7 days, something like that.
Okay. All right. So now we've distinguished between protesting, rioting, and looting. What actionable progressions have been made with protesting, peaceful or otherwise? Like I know we mentioned, Miguel mentioned earlier, like defunding the police. Can you guys talk a little bit more towards that? I know we've also seen clips of globally people destroying some of these statues that are based on these racial disparities. But what actionable items have been progressed or have progressed?
In the Twin Cities specifically, this is the Minneapolis Police Department specifically that's responsible for this murder. So there was a lot of calls for them to be held responsible for their action. And I feel like the people who have been out on the front lines trying to make a difference have actually, our voices have been heard. And so there's so many major funders of the Minneapolis Police Department, whereas even if the government hasn't passed the legislation yet to defund the police, they've cut ties with the Minneapolis Police Department, which is huge. Like First Avenue is one of our biggest music venues. They've cut ties with them. The University of Minnesota is one of their biggest financial supporters, period, have cut ties. The whole Minneapolis public school system has cut ties. So I feel like we're seeing such a major impact that our protests are having, and that even if we haven't quite caught up on the legislative end, people are still making, very quick decisions. Or even, for example, the fact that the police officers have not only been fired, but they've also been charged. Sometimes we never even get to that point. So I do feel like we are seeing movement because of us being in the streets, and that is at least somewhat hopeful in these times.
I would say in LA, if just before I move on to a larger discussion, but in LA specifically, one of the most prominent calls to action have been to defund the police because there has been a contentious relationship between the Los Angeles and the LAPD. You know, as you mentioned in the 1992 riots with Rodney King. In Los Angeles, there we have a mayor. The mayor is named Eric Garcetti, and the mayor is responsible for proposing and submitting the budget. Approving the budget. And in Los Angeles, of the unrestricted revenue budget, which is about 51% of the Los Angeles total budget, in total is around $5.3 billion, I believe. 54% of that is allocated to the police alone, making their budget around $3.2 billion.
Wow.
There's been large calls to defund and divest that amount into other areas of the community, which they find useful. There was a little bit of progress there in which Garcetti did agree to subjugate $150 million from their budget into other areas, which, you know, is less than 10%. I mean, it's not even, you know, it's not even a dent way possible to that budget. So people are still protesting, calling for more. But just speaking about defunding police, just to give you just get everyone on a call, on a Zoom, an idea of what that relates to in this nation. Police departments have been a consistent priority in budgets in cities here in America in recent years. In America's largest 10 cities alone, the share of city budget allocated to the police continually to increase, although although most cities hail how crime has consistently gone down. Just to kind of give you a little fact on that, like the overall budgets for the 10 largest US cities grew an average of 8% between 2019 and 2020. And spending on the police departments grew in tandem by 6% on average, which is an extra $500 million pumped into these 10 police departments overall in the past year. So it just shows you how much money is going into these departments, yet alone we aren't seeing any true change, and we aren't seeing any trust built by the communities that they support.
And when we talk about defunding, if these taxpayer dollars aren't going directly to the police forces, where can that money be better allocated towards?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like just backing up a little. So defunding the police. One of the biggest misconceptions is that defunding is disbanding the police, right? But however, the call for defunding the police is not disbanding the police or policing altogether. It's pretty much a way to rethink and reestablish policing. And so to your question, where can it go? It's the redistribution of resources, right? It's putting these resources into different forms of policing, such as community boards, education, social workers, community activities, mental health resources, etc. It's a way of getting the community involved in policing, not just officers. Defunding the police hasn't been done on a large scale, so we don't truly have a picture of what it would exactly do to crime and to how it exactly play out. But there is some evidence that less policing by officers can lead to less crime. Just to give a study, there was a study in 2017, a report done by the NYPD in which they purposely pulled back on proactively policing. And in doing so, they found that there was 2,100 fewer crime complaints over just a period of 2 weeks. So we have seen this tried in certain cases, and we do understand that it will help to bring trust in the communities. I don't know if anyone paid attention, but in 2015, Obama actually put together a police task force, and he took a deep dive into policing in the 21st century. And then on that task force, he involved everyone, like a wide ranging of professionals, from police commissioners to community activists to lawyers to professors, and they were tasked with creating pretty much creating how to strengthen the community policing and trust among law enforcement officers and like the communities they serve. And in doing so, they developed 6 pillars in which to truly improve policing in relation to the people. And that task force the task force reports pretty much supports the message of the protesters, which is to rethink and defund police and put resources in community policing, right? And what is community policing? Community policing pretty much just combines a focus of intervention and prevention through problem solving and building collaborative partnerships between law enforcement agencies and schools, social services, and other stakeholders. So in this way, community policing not only improves public safety, but it also enhances social connectivity and economic strength, which increases community resilience to crime.
Yeah. Megan, did you want to add anything to that one? If not, I'll go into the Oh, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say everything I was going to say is right along the same lines, especially I know that the education example that he mentioned is something that's a really big deal, as I said before, in the Twin Cities. And we've had so many programs cut in the schools in the Twin Cities over, the past few decades. And I know, with the Karen examples or, white women that love to call the police for Black people living. There's a specific area of town that I do a lot of work with this nonprofit organization in St. Paul. And I feel like the old white women in that area are always calling the police, are always complaining to the neighborhood groups about children that are out, just being kids, but it's a group of Black kids. So they don't trust them. They think they're up to no good. And sometimes they are, as kids can be bad sometimes. If they had after school programming to go to, if they still had arts, organizations or sporting groups or whatever it is that they can do after school to stay out of trouble, to make sure someone's looking after them. If their parents can't afford daycare or somebody to watch them, they're not going to be around to get into mischief or even to just be wrongly accused of doing something that they're not doing. And I just feel like all of the money that we're putting into the police could just be so better spent in so many different arenas. So,
absolutely. And so I know we'll talk a little bit more about this later as well, but what are the next steps for on the front line? Who are the new leaders? What are some of the initiatives that are out there? And Megan, definitely feel free to talk a little bit more about outsiders too. But where do we go from here, and what can people do locally to help?
So I know here specifically for the week and a half, 2 weeks that the city was literally on fire and under attack, it genuinely felt like being at war. All of the communities that had experienced the fires already had disparities in life. Then because of COVID, a lot of them did not have access to stores and things of that nature that were closing or had limited hours. Then because of the destruction of their communities, they really, really do not have access to essential goods, food, hygiene products, baby products, anything like that. So while all of this was happening, the cities were super activated and everyone was coming together trying to figure out how we can support the people who are most affected by the destruction that's happening right now. And so a lot of different groups were doing work, whether that's providing food for the protesters, whether that's buying supplies for the people who are in need, whether that's cleaning up at different sites as things are torn down, we put them back together. There's just so much going on that it was a little hard to try to latch onto other movements, especially because we were still under threat. There were several events that I was going to take part in as an artist that got canceled because we were getting threats from white supremacist groups that would find our events on Facebook and make threats. And we just didn't know how real they were. And we didn't want to put people's lives at risk. So during the first week, especially, we couldn't do a lot of the initiatives that we wanted to do. And I felt inactive, like I wasn't having the opportunity to genuinely apply my skills to help. And I have artistic skills, I have organizing skills. So I figured my energy would be better served if I just got activated myself. And so I came together with some friends that were all staying with me because it wasn't safe to stay at their homes in Minneapolis. And we got volunteers together. We asked the community for donations. We would drive out to the suburbs, if not Wisconsin sometimes, and we were buying all the supplies that the community needed. We were buying protective gear for the protesters. We were buying fire extinguishers for the neighborhoods so that they could actually try to combat the people that were actively trying to burn their homes down. And so that's where the Outsiders was birthed from, just this need and this desire to help and wanting to have a concrete organization to funnel these funds through and to get people organized. moving forward, or since that time, we felt the energy dissipate a little bit. People are still out every day, especially around the memorial site for where George Floyd died. There are people out every single day with live music, with food, with free things for the community. Like, people are very, very much engaged. We're still protesting. We have events all the time. But as the energy is dying down and that kind of fight or flight energy is leaving us, I think a lot of the organizers are now trying to figure out what are the next steps. And to be honest, everything is not ironed out. A lot of money came flooding into the communities. Certain organizations ended up with millions of dollars. Now we're reassessing what needs to happen with that money and who's actually in charge of it. There are several organizations that are actually run by white people. Their entire, board of directors are white people, and they have access to millions of dollars that they got because of the communities of color that, went through this amazing movement, but also all of this destruction. So I think as a community now, we're trying to slow down a bit. We're trying to just really sit in the energy of what's happened, determine what resources we now have access to that we didn't have before, and just kind of imagine how we can really apply those in the ways that matter. I know for the outsider specifically, will continue to do the donation runs that I'm doing and supplying and donating to different drop sites. But I would also like to shift focus and figure out how I can empower artists, because I feel like, one, being an artist, and two, at this time, this narrative is so essential to be shared, what we went through, what it felt like, what we're still going through. And only artists can speak to things of that nature, whether it's through music or storytelling or video. So my goal is to continue to accept donations and to figure out other ways to get funds so that I can empower artists in the community so that they can, just be active and making sure that they're making a change.
And we'll have you drop your information a little bit later too, so that people can reach out to you and they can continue to donate to your initiative as well with the outsiders.
Megan, next time you plan an art event, let me know. I'll bring the bazooka, okay? So you can
Honestly, we kind of needed that. I'm not even
Ty just wanted to say another good thing that kind of came out and like moving forward was the Justice and Policing Act, which was proposed by the Democrats here in the U.S. It's actually, Miguel spoke about it earlier, but it actually leads to abolish that qualified immunity that policemen enjoy now, amongst other legislative aims to combat police misconduct, excessive force, and racial bias in profiling. So that's one of the biggest, I think, legislative piece that has come out moving forward. But then also, I just think the way to achieve this is to continue to make noise and to bring awareness. That includes voting up and down the ballot, not just the big positions that we know, and really becoming knowledgeable about local politics as well as federal and national politics, because it's your senators and representatives in Congress that create the federal laws and have power to reform criminal justice system through legislation, as we've seen with the Dems introducing the Justice and Policing Act. Most state Supreme judges are elected to the polls. We can actually have a voice there. It's our local state representatives and legislators that are responsible for policies that pretty much constitute crime and the procedures for responding to crime and sentencing structures. It's the sheriffs are typically elected positions as well. And then you have your district attorneys, who are considered like the top, law enforcement officials in states. They decide when an arrest leads to a charge. They can, and they're typically elected as well. Then you have your mayor who appoints the chief of police, who manages law enforcement within your cities. Of course, your governor, who pretty much implements criminal justice and public safety policies and programs. And then you have our ever so famous president, who the Attorney General, who pretty much leads the Department of Justice and is responsible for enforcing, federal law and administering justice. So we have to vote at all levels, and we have to stay involved with our local communities and politics, and just continue to have a voice.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said that better myself. I know I've had conversations with my sister, my youngest sister. She's, Angela Davis, the revolutionary, right? She's ready to get out there. And I'm like, well, it starts, yes, we can do this protesting and you can do this avenue, but at the end of the day, it's going to come back to policy and legislation. And that's where that's what we really have to fight to change. And like you said, it starts with the vote. We have to get out there and vote, vote, vote. Like, your voice counts, let it be heard. But when it comes to making these actual changes, getting these petitions passed, these bills passed, it comes from these legislative officials. So thank you. Thank you both for joining us for this segment. I think this is one of the most powerful, because this is talking literally about what is happening right now on the ground, and then what we can better do to improve our community together. So I want to take the time to commend you, both of you all, and all the other protesters that are on the front line. You truly have made and continue to make such a revolutionary impact, and not just in America, but globally. Because as you said, all 50 states had some form of protest, and then over 18 countries had protests. So this is now not about even just the US. This is a global situation, and we have global support. So I think that's huge. And I think we definitely have to keep yelling, because that's how we're getting heard. So thank you guys again. We're going to take a very quick break, but then stay tuned as we go ahead and get ready to close out our final discussion topics. Since we kind of about to be over, since we about to, oops.
It's an organization whose mission it is to activate, connect, and mobilize the largest racial equity community in tech to dismantle the structural barriers that prevent the full participation and leadership of Black and Latinx people in the innovation economy. To learn more about what they do, visit www.code2040.org/mission. Thank you.
Did you know that LA proposed to defund their police commission by 150 million and to reinvest them in minority communities?
So we just touched on what we can do now beyond the protests, and how we have seen change take place in just a short 2-week span. But what about the corporations? We haven't really touched on those, and what does their corporate responsibility look like? How do we hold our employers, or even some of our favorite brands, accountable? I read an article actually just yesterday about Aunt Jemima. And that's, for those of you that don't know, it's one of America's beloved pancake mix and hot cake breakfast syrups. And they're actually owned by the Quaker Oats Company, which is a subsidiary of PepsiCo. But they're going to rebrand their name and logos and their logo image as it's based on a racial stereotype. So it's a character, Aunt Jemima, which is derived from the slavery era, with the main logo being a Black woman who knows how to really fluff up a pancake. But Quaker Oats released a statement that removing the image and the name as part of an effort to the company to make progress towards racial equality. And that although they are making an effort towards racial equality through several other initiatives, they also must take a hard look at their portfolio of brands to ensure that they reflect the company's values and meet their customers' expectations. And I mean, I guess it sounds good, and I definitely respect that. But what are other corporations doing to take accountability and responsibility for some of the racial disparities they may have been built on? And so from Chicago, Illinois, we'll have Lydia Smith, who's a diversity manager for McDonald's Corporation, to highlight some of those corporate initiatives.
I'm Lydia Smith, and I'm the University Programs and Diversity Manager at McDonald's Corporation, headquartered here in Chicago, Illinois. I'm also a Chicago native, so being back here in the city during this time has definitely been one filled with so many different types of emotions, yet I've been able to try to redirect this energy so I can be most impactful to my community. It's heartwarming to see the range of diversity, both on the front lines and behind the scenes, in the form of protesting, volunteering, calling, emailing, or even donating. Now, there are some organizations across the city that have continued to fight for racial equality as well as community revival. Outside the local chapter of Black Lives Matter, I've seen amazing work from the John Walk Foundation, A Long Walk from Home, Project Hood, My Block, My Hood, My City, and Imagine Inglewood If, and that's just to name a few. Other companies have committed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to show their support against racism and ending violence and pledging against social injustices. And if you're not seeing it from your organization, I'm pretty sure you've received at least a dozen emails from the brands that you've ever followed to express their shock over the current events that's occurring in the United States. And as of today, 250 companies around the United States have pledged to observe Juneteenth, this Friday, June 19th, as a company-wide holiday, recommending that their employees use this time to listen and educate themselves, to volunteer, to march, to utilize their voice in whatever ways is best suited for them. Now let's discuss the ways in which organizations have taken a stance during this time. We've seen an abundance of organizations release public statements or provide words of solidarity with their Black colleagues, employees, peers, and customers. And we've also seen a lot of them provide those financial contributions to organizations that are there to drive toward racial equality. For example, McDonald's has pledged $1 million toward the NAACP and National Urban League to really fight against racial injustice. We've launched about 5 global webcasts to really touch on our anti-racism beliefs, as well as ways in which employees can be better allies, both inside the workplace and outside. We've also provided them with a lot of tools and resources so that they can educate themselves and find ways to learn more about the problems that may not directly impact them in their day-to-day lives. There's some amazing work being done by other organizations, such as PayPal, who has committed $530 million to Black and minority-owned businesses. And then we have Bank of America, who has contributed $1 billion over the next 4 years to economic and racial inequalities. The last company I really want to highlight is Ben & Jerry's. They have provided ongoing support toward Black lives and really have taken a stance against dismantling white supremacy. They've been currently releasing a lot of materials for Congress to understand, to pass the necessary legislation, provide reparations, and really create this national task force that will oversee police and hold them accountable.
All right, well, that was a great segment on what we can do moving forward. And thank you, Lydia, for just sharing your tidbits and your experience in Chicago. But we are in 2020 and we couldn't have this co-hosted with Techie without talking about some of the things that are up in the future. So just a tip that the technology that's out there today, since we are living in the Matrix and the Terminator moment that Hollywood has been predicting for all these years and literally living season 6 of Black Mirror. Well, what can you do today with your smartphone? So if you are pulled over, there is an iPhone feature where if you say, Siri, I'm being pulled over, then it's automatically going to turn your camera on, your microphone on, and start recording the entire interaction. So that's just a tidbit if you ever get stopped by the police. And then also we have data tracing that's new. So everybody with a smartphone, you've been giving the big 4, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, all of your information. But we're in the era where AI is rapidly increasing. And this is a tool that has been created by humans and has its biases. So a lot of studies are coming out that people of color are being misrepresented and mistreated. So whether that's facial recognition not working or being required because it doesn't capture the person's skin tone or complexion. These are some things that you guys should be thinking about because I know IE is very strong on technology and innovation. So these are some areas that you can think of going into the future where you can make a difference on that front. So now we're going to bring back a couple of our panelists. We've been watching and monitoring the chats, and you guys have submitted some great questions. So first we're going to have up Tyler come out.
All right, so Hello. So we have a couple questions for you. We'll start with one for right now. You mentioned your experience with the Peace Corps. This organization and many like it have been criticized for perpetuating the concept of the white savior complex. What do you think of this, and what recommendations do you have for these organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was something about 6 months into the 2 years to 3 months of my service that I started to grapple with. And you would kind of see also other volunteers kind of start to be like, wait, what are we doing here? Are we qualified to be doing this? Are we just placed here because we're white Americans? And honestly, the answer is yes. I had one of our volunteer leaders pretty much say, like, I went in as a teacher trainer, and I was like, I don't have any teacher training. I wasn't a teacher before. And he's like, well, your K through 12 is better than any education they'll ever get. So right there, you just sideswiped who these people are, you know, that you have no hope for them. And the best that they're ever going to get is this 27-year-old white boy coming in and saving them. And that was kind of my first wake-up call. Secondly, and what's really important, is that Peace Corps is a representation of what America is. So it was mostly white volunteers. It didn't represent volunteers of color. It didn't give resources to volunteers of colors because their experience was vastly different than a volunteer that was white, because we carried a lot of privilege, a lot of, not to stereotype the whole continent, but especially where we were at, they have an image of what America is. And America is white, rich, powerful. And here I am coming in as a white male. And so I carried on that, and I carried on a lot of that privilege. And so it was really kind of sad to see that volunteers would take advantage of that, or we wouldn't challenge ourselves. We wouldn't use that privilege for good. We wouldn't do women's work. We would actually let the women do the work for us, and we wouldn't challenge the patriarch, you know? And so it was a really interesting process that I 100% think needs to be reevaluated and possibly even taken away, because a community-based system is going to be 100% more empowering the people to empower their own community, empower their own people. And that's really what's going to create change. So it's a very complex subject and topic, so I don't want to take up too much time, but my answer is yes, but it comes with a lot of understanding of why the Peace Corps was made. It wasn't to go and save, it was actually to strengthen the United States across. It was to put ourselves in more countries. It was to watch. And so these are things that we have to kind of keep in mind behind this beautifully painted picture of what the Peace Corps is. And then the last thing I'll say is, white Americans that go and do service trips like this, like Peace Corps or something much less of time, and take pictures with beautiful Black African babies, but won't support their own Black community in the United States, is flexing their racism very strong. And it's something that we don't think about often, or we don't call out. And there is such thing as a white savior complex, and we do it often and we fall into it. So again, challenge yourself on when you went and traveled to places that were developing countries, and did you glorify poverty? Did you glorify Africanness, whatever that is, and perpetuate a story back home rather than the true story of what it is there? So a lot to unpack there, but again, a lot of resources online, and you can definitely reach out to me online in other resources as well.
Thanks, Tyler. I think we're gonna have to get you your own show very soon. Just
I agree. Tyler deserves. I'm for that.
Right. All right. So we're gonna oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. We actually had a couple of more questions. So.
Yep. So we're actually gonna bring in some of our other IE students. If you guys want to jump in, we have a question that you guys can answer. It says, thank you guys for sharing your thoughts and experiences. Moving forward, I would really like to hear about how you would think IE can better address racism, microaggression, or prejudice, or just general race relation knowledge on campus.
Hello. So I think that's a really good question. And my approach to it is that, you know, we have to realize that right now we are grown, we are old. We're no longer 12, 4, 6, and saying what can IE do is kind of diminishing, yourself and taking away the responsibility from the fact that you are capable of doing that yourself. So what I would advise is that you should just spend a lot of time reflecting on yourself and actually doing introspection, educating yourself. And instead of saying, like, okay, what can IE do? And they can do, a multitude of things. We are working on a petition a proposal, sorry, to send to them. What you have to actually realize is that it starts with you. So if you do want to, work on this, instead of saying, oh, IE should do this, 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 it's better to just look at yourself and then realize, you know, what are the things that I say maybe like with just like a few friends, or what are the thoughts that I have which actually aren't that correct, And I think that would help people.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to Tyler's point too. Like it starts with yourself and that reflection, educating yourself and listening to these conversations that we're having and listening to these people of color that are telling you, hey, I don't like when you come, I may have braids that are long. I don't need your hands in my hair. Like don't come into my space. Okay. I'll let anybody else on the panel if you guys want to jump in and say anything.
I think I'll go ahead and definitely echo like what you just said about what Tyler said. Educate yourself, but also take a deep breath and take a beat before you say something. I think at the end of the day, when you have interactions with people, you have to understand that would you appreciate that happening to you? So for example, when you made the comment about the hair, at the end of the day, how I dress, how I look, how I present myself is going to be in a professional matter no matter what. And at the end of the day, why would you ask that question if you wouldn't have expected that question to be asked unto yourself? There's no problem in starting a conversation. There's no problem in like reaching across the space of diversity to ask certain things. But I think we all have a sense of a modern realization that there are certain things that you really shouldn't be asking about, and also just be very mindful of the spaces and of the things that you say. But lastly, to Tyler's point again, educate yourself. Google exists. There's avenues and there's tools in place to be able to find and to research about certain things. So don't be afraid to ask someone and create that space and create that space for conversation. But there's also ways that you can educate yourself. We're all very smart individuals and we know how to do that research. So at the end of the day, empower yourself and empower your space of knowledge.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly as well. I think the university, as an organization, as long as they can create more platforms and more opportunities for people to share in a comfortable environment their experiences, there's definitely been a lot of talk about sustainability, right? But I think empowerment is equally as important. I think the more people that we can empower across the world, the better that gives, it just elevates all the opportunities that exist. And so I think as long as the university can find ways to encourage those types of conversations, so that way people feel empowered and within the organization. From a student body perspective, I think the students have done a great job, at least from my personal experience. But one thing that I would just recommend to people is just treat everybody as an individual and don't let them represent a bigger portion, if that makes any sense. So for me, carrying the burden of having to conduct myself a certain way, to make sure that people perceive me a certain way, to be treated as an individual and make sure that I represent Jermaine and Jermaine only, I think that's a good thing. So make sure that when you talk to people and have conversations, just try to treat them on an individual basis and not bring any other, stereotypes into the conversation.
Thank you all. And for any additional resources, you guys can, once you register, there is a document, a Google Drive document. You can go ahead and click on that. We have a list of resources available to you, books, articles, social media outlets that you can follow, movies on Netflix if you need something quick and easy just to connect to. But it gives you a lot of history to being Black, to being African American, to being just a person of color. And so if you need any assistance in taking that knowledge journey, start there. And I promise you, everything will kind of just build and you'll be opened up to so many other resources that you can, so you can fully understand kind of how to proceed, how to redirect some of your questions or any of your concerns.
Yeah, and that just to reiterate, like, please go to that one pager. We put a lot of time into it and different type of resources for whatever outlet you feel comfortable with, but it's just a starter pack. So you have to dig deeper than what we put on that one pager, because it's not even the surface. And we grew up, like, we're both from Chicago. Our parents made us watch certain civil rights movements since we were children, or civil rights movies since we were children. We take Black History Month very serious. So that's another time of the year that we celebrate all types of Blackness and accomplishments from those that came before us. Okay, so we did have a couple of more questions, and then we're gonna wrap this on up. We're gonna bring back Ian and Miguel, since they got everybody's interest on the legislative side, for a few questions. Okay, so you guys are in the hot seat, and I want both of you to go ahead and chime in. So one of the questions was, so Obama had 8 years in the White House. Could he have done more, like, i.e. Repeal the 1994 crime law, or should we just celebrate that he got into office?
So I'll jump in on this one. We absolutely could have held the Justice Department that was headed up by Eric Holder under much more scrutiny. I think there's a New York Times article that talked about, while they expressed condolences and scathing rebukes of Ferguson police departments and other departments that had committed murder against American citizens, at the same time, when it made it to the Supreme Court, they would always be on the side of law enforcement. And so when you look at, saying, one thing, doing another when it matters, absolutely the Department of Justice, which has the Civil Rights Division, found itself in a quandary where you're supporting law enforcement who take lives, and then at the same time giving lip service to civil rights. They absolutely could have done more. Not to be a, Monday morning quarterback. I'm sure there are, competing divisions in every business and every office. However, when it comes to leadership of the Department of Justice, it's confusing, and it's not setting the tone for what will happen to officers who break the law themselves. And that speaks directly to, I think, Miguel's understanding of qualified immunity that we spoke a bit on the panel.
And Miguel, did you want to add to that?
No, I think that sums it up pretty well.
And then the next question that we had is there a case for reparations? So we are seeing, as other panelists have said, there's millions of dollars being allocated during COVID. We've come up with trillions of dollars all of a sudden. So is there a case now today, after all of that we've been seeing and corporations acknowledging, Black lives do matter, is there a case now for reparations?
So I'll kick this one off directly, as it's a very important bill. The first bill, HR 40, was introduced in 1989 by my great uncle. It's a study for reparations, and he didn't get that from anywhere but the study for reparations that the United States had paid before. Japanese Americans who were interned wrongfully during World War II created a study, and unfortunately for the United States government, this very second you open up a study, you realize, yes, this is possible, and yes, you do need to pay. There's several plans out there. Who exactly qualifies for them? How do you do that? That's great, but I think there needs to be more than just a nod and an apology. I think there needs to be actual financial responsibility, given that the frustration that we're dealing with is largely due to unearned wealth at the hands of treating people as property. And so HR 40, they had just last Juneteenth a hearing in the United States House addressing the bill, which is now carried by Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas, and looking at what a package would look like. There's been a really great study, I believe Yahoo Finance put it out, that focused on a price tag around $17 trillion is what would actually be owed with interest on wealth that was earned by folks who were not able to receive compensation. What that breaks down into housing, just other factors of industry, what it would look like, loan mortgages, how it would break down on payment would be really left up to a study on what it would look like. But it's very clear that our country can ante up the funding if need be.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I would add to Ian's point is the way in which we discuss racial policies in America. That ultimately, I think, creates the biggest challenge to creating substantive legislation. And I think it also has to do with your question on the Obama administration. And Robin DiAngelo, she's an author of a book called White Fragility, and she points this out. And what's occurred is that we've reduced talking about racism to an individual, immoral, and inherently binary act. You're either racist and bad, or you're not racist and good. And this definition of racism, specifically used in terms of policy, has been around in the post-civil rights era. And this definition makes it impossible to discuss racism as anything systemic, and much less to pass any laws. And talking about race as a question of morality, I think, makes institutions and voters immediately defensive. And you can see this in how police unions have reacted. You can see this in how conservative parties have reacted. You can see this also as how privileged liberals react when we perpetuate racism. So changing this definition of how we interact politically around specific race policies like reparations will be at the base of creating legislation. And I think that it's also very relevant when you're talking about the Obama administration, because on some hand, that allowed white liberals who haven't recognized their privilege the emotional permission to not do more by having voted. And so this is part of the question of morality and this binary issue of racism. So that's kind of what I would say in terms of the next step before we can do something like what Ian's alluded to. We have to figure out a better way to discuss racism and race-oriented policies.
Hey, Leslie, can I just add one quick thing regarding and legislation?
Yeah, jump on in.
Add a really quick, another progressive thing that's happened in California is that they have recently a proposal to establish a task force to study and prepare recommendations for how to give reparations to Black people was passed by the California Assembly recently.
Thanks for adding that, Chris. Appreciate it. All right, so I think we're gonna wrap that up for the Q&A since we are already 15 to 20 minutes over. But just thank you guys for popping back up. Thank you all the attendees that are staying on and have submitted your questions. And feel free, if you have more, just go ahead and add them. We'll try to fill them out to the respective speakers later so we can answer some of the follow-up questions for you guys.
And just to jump in on, I know what we talked about, the microaggressions at IE. During this summit, we came together with a number of organizations on campus that really want to, are behind us. They support this Black Lives Matter movement, but more than that, they support equality for all humanity, right? And so what we're doing now is we're working towards some type of initiative where we can kind of give IE maybe some actionable items that the student body thinks that would be progressive. And so stay tuned for that. We literally are just deciding this within, again, we put all of this together in a week and a half. So all of this is something that is a blueprint for so much more to come. So if you have more questions, don't worry. We are hoping that there will be additional platforms that you can express kind of your personal experiences and others out there. Because like we said before, while we're focusing right now on Black lives and Black America, this is a global issue. Oppression is global, okay? So we know that, we're aware of that, and we wanna just take the time to start here, have this blueprint, and then everything can unfold after that. So I wanna leave with that one really quickly.
And
go ahead.
To add to that, just like if you're a part of a club, we've been working with all the various groups like Ty mentioned. So if there is a concern that you have or questions, like talk to your club leaders on campus. We have student government that's working with us, women in business, out and allies. We're gonna name everybody at the end, But, you know, these are the conversations that you should be not waiting for the USA Club to do something, but to talk directly to your leadership. So how you can partner with some of us, or we can all come together again and have various conversations about your region and your different experiences. So that's why this came about, not only out of being overwhelmed, but trying to create a student-led platform for us to talk. And there's a lot of alumni that want to get involved as well, in the different departments that have supported this. So start right now with your clubs, like how we're talking about on the local level legislation. Start with your clubs that you're a part of now. Have that conversation. What are some things that you want to have for change? Where you're talking to the different departments, and Global Transformation is starting a petition that we will, they'll be sending out to the student body. So just stay tuned, but don't wait for a platform like this to come to want to be involved and make change. Like, you have the autonomy to do that right now within the current clubs or organizations that you're in right now at IE.
Absolutely. So we're going to have Megan and Tyler come and pretty much close out this segment of the panel, and then we will do our formal closing out. We do have another video from the Vice President of IE University, but if we can have Megan and Tyler come back on. Megan's going to give us some initiatives and how you can continue to contribute after this conference segment, and then Tyler's going to share some information on what you can do additionally as an ally.
Thanks. So a lot of the work that we have to do in the Twin Cities, of course, is work that needs to be done in person, but we do still need a lot of support from people that are not in the actual Twin Cities. We do need to get money to the communities that have been most devastated by these fires, by this destruction. And we also need to invest money back into those same communities to make sure that they stay Black-owned businesses or places that people of color own, because now that they are destroyed, there is the risk of corporations moving in, getting all that property, and continuing the efforts of gentrification that have already been taking place. So there are a lot of different organizations that are doing amazing work in the Twin Cities. I'm just going to list them off very quickly, and the moderators will add the links once they post this on YouTube later. So if you are interested in donating, you can check that out and find the appropriate information to reach out. So my organization is called The Outsiders. We are focused on arts, as I said, in addition to providing necessary goods and essentials to the communities that have been affected. Another amazing art-based organization in the Twin Cities is called True Art Speaks. It's composed of artists and activists in the Twin Cities that have been active for years, and they do a lot of really great work in St. Paul specifically. Another organization is called Hallie Q. Brown. Even before everything with the protests and with COVID, they have been a very long-running organization that accepts donations, that gives clothing to people in need, provides food, has an active food shelf every single week. And so they've been very active during this time and would be amazing to support in St. Paul as well. And another organization that's based in Minneapolis is CTUL. It's El Centro de Trabajadores Unidos en Lucha, or Center of Workers United in Struggle, which is a Hispanic-based organization that works with people who have discrepancies with their jobs in the center, but they've also been very active with providing goods for the community as well.
Am I up?
Yes, you are.
Good to go. So I bet you will know the first thing that I'm going to say, and it starts with you. So keep going, keep educating yourself. Go on Google, go on the document that the Black Summit is going to be providing you. There's a lot of great resources, and don't stop. Talk about racism with your white friends and your family. It's uncomfortable at first. It was super uncomfortable for me. It actually still is sometimes, especially with my family. But the more you talk about it and the more you educate yourself and you understand the language to use, the easier it gets. And you're actually able to call out people, you're able to have productive conversations, you're able to really create a conversation, again, that's productive. Move from being a racist to not a racist to anti-racist. So racism is on a spectrum. And just because you're possibly not participating in what you'll see as, you know, the Karens and saying very vulgar things, it doesn't mean that you're actively an anti-racist and working to dismantle the system. Do not look for validation for being not racist. I think there was honestly, and this is kind of a very vulnerable thing, but I think there was a moment that I looked to the people around me, people of color, to kind of compliment me and being like, not a racist. And I finally was like, no, you're just being not an, I can't swear. I was told not to swear on this. You're just being a decent person, meaning you're at the basic level, you know, and so don't expect that not being a racist means that you get to be complimented or need to be complimented by your Black friends. You don't get to call yourself an ally. This is also another thing that I've learned, and it's an interesting thing. You know, let the communities, marginalized communities, the Black community call you an ally, and it's okay if you're not. And I might be called an ally by Ty and Leslie, but that doesn't mean everybody on this panel is going to receive me as an ally. They don't know me. And so that's also a work in progress, but I understand that a lot of white people maybe do an act of kindness and jump to that and want to be called that. It's not a title that you're going to achieve. It's more the actions that you just need to live your life by. And then don't give up. This is a journey. And just because I've educated myself, I have so much to learn. And it's, I think, something to not be afraid of, because even if I've messed up, even if I say something that's inappropriate, I've never been reprimanded or called out or screamed at by my Black friends, because they understand that I'm trying. Of course, if it's an overt racism, then yes. But again, it's a community that is trying to, we're all working to something together. And so I think just, again, don't stop. And I think lastly, and this is, and kind of going really quickly, is, again, educate, protest, donate, sign petitions, speak up. And on that donation part, it kind of going through this talk is reparations don't have to be a policy. So you can start donating to Black-owned businesses. You can start donating to the organizations that Megan had mentioned, and start contributing to building up the Black community much better. And lastly, for me, and this is just very personal, I have to give a moment to all Black lives, and that includes also Black trans lives, and really understanding, and I encourage everybody to really understand the community of Black trans people and how much more violence they receive on a daily basis, how much more they deal with homelessness, how much more they deal with sexual assault. These things are really real. And if you look back on the past year, and actually 2019, about how many deaths happened over these things, how many Black trans people were killed or murdered, it's insane. So again, I just encourage you to continue to do education, and with lots of love. So thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this.
Hello. As president of IE University, I would like to congratulate all our members who have organized this IE Black Summit today. Let me first start by condemning the unjust killing of George Floyd several weeks ago by a police officer in the US. This episode has been followed by lots of peaceful manifestations and demonstrations across the globe. Here at IE University, we have also pronounced and published a number of statements in condemnation of this, but also rejecting any form of discrimination on our campus and worldwide. For example, our founder, Diego del Alcázar Silvela, joined a statement made by the director of the Center for Diversity at IE. This was also followed by a letter from Susana Malcorra, the Dean of the School of Public Affairs at IE. I also, for example, wrote an article that was published yesterday on LinkedIn, where I have over 150,000 followers, rejecting racism and comparing racism with the worst of the viruses. What I hope is that you realize that at IE, we are deeply committed to combat any form of discrimination. And we want to provide all our students and members with a platform where they can actually express themselves freely. And they can actually recognize that the others deserve the same treatment. We very much care for an equal respect and concern for all the members of IE on campus. And that's why I invite you to formulate all the suggestions that you think may improve this atmosphere of coexistence peacefully, respectful, and enhancing and embracing this very cherished diversity worldwide. In addition, what I commit today is actually to start producing a number of materials that can help us understand better how to combat this phenomenon, which is, as I was saying, more harmful worldwide than any sort of virus. And that's why we will focus on writing and releasing and publishing a number of case studies in order to improve inclusion and combating discrimination at companies, organizations, and also ways of how we can actually disseminate the best possible spirit of inclusion through education. Anyway, what I hope is that you had the chance of exchanging views about how to improve things on campus and how also to improve and transform the rest of the world. What you know is that you have our full support in order to succeed in this very Excel mission. Thanks very much for your commitment, and of course, we will see each other very soon.
So, on behalf of the IE USA Club and Tech IE, we want to thank each of you for joining us today for our first ever IE Black Summit. We pray you are able to process the experiences our panelists shared today, and we'll be able to share this knowledge with your global network. The time is now to make a change. The time is now to stand up for the rights of not only people of color, but for all of humanity. We are witnessing a societal revolution right before our eyes. 10 years from now, when you look back at this very moment, what story will you tell? What impact will you have made?
So again, make sure to review that one pager on the Tech IE event page that we put together. We know that this session has covered a lot and it's draining, it's heavy, and just like us, it hurts. We're grieving right now. So don't think that we're just fine because we have good personalities. But post the Black Summit one pager, look at that, share it with your friends, do your additional research that Tyler mentioned. It starts with you, and have those tough conversations with your friends and your family members. And most importantly, listen to others and their stories and their perspectives. That's the only way that we're going to be able to create a better environment and equality for all, and especially Black people and people of color across the globe. So we want to take time to welcome all of our panelists back for a photo. Thank you all for your contributions today. The group chats, the text messages are blowing up. You guys are a hit. So if we get a reality TV show spinoff, just let you know that.
Hey, Oprah.
Your stories were so valuable. People really appreciated you sharing your experiences and being here together with us today. And then last but not least, thank you to all the orgs that helped us out in putting this great event together. And literally a week and a half, Ty and I are wrapping up our EMBA and getting ready to graduate next month while competing for Venture Lab. So this was a quick turnaround, but thank you, IE Campus Life, IE School of Global Public Affairs, the Africa Center, IE North American team, Women in Business, IE Africa Club, Student Government, Out and Allies, Global Transformation, all the tech clubs, coding, blockchains, e-commerce, Net Impact, Smart Cities. If I forgot someone, I apologize. Thank you everybody that's in the Black Summit coordinator WhatsApp group that has dropped videos, suggestions, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you guys so much. Thanks again to our panelists. Very, very many thanks and much love for being a part of this with us and bearing with us as we put this together. And on that note, thank you all again for tuning in at home. Buenas noches from Madrid. We hope you guys are safe and look forward to getting this. Once we do the post-production, you'll get a copy of it. You'll get the link. So thank you guys again.
Share on social media, hashtag IE Black Summit.
Thanks, guys.
We gotta pray. We gotta pray. We gotta pray. Pray for the world tonight. We gotta save somebody, save somebody tonight. Yeah. right from